If you're waking up 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a night just to use the bathroom, I want you to actually stay with me here, because what I'm going to walk you through today is going to sound almost too simple to work, and that's exactly why most people never try it. I'm a urologist. I've spent years sitting across from patients over 50 who are exhausted, not tired in the normal sense. Exhausted in that specific way where you dread going to bed because you already know how the night is going to go. You'll fall asleep, and an hour or two later, you'll be wide awake again, walking to the bathroom in the dark, and then lying there afterward waiting for sleep to come back, which it often doesn't, not fully. And then it happens again a couple hours after that. Most people assume the fix is obvious. Drink less water, especially at night, and I understand why that feels logical. Less water in should mean less need to go out. Except that's not how your body actually handles fluid, and for a lot of my patients, cutting water too aggressively in the evening actually made things worse, not better. Some of them came to me having already tried that exact fix for months, convinced they were just broken somehow because it hadn't worked. So today I want to give you the real method. Not a guess, not a home remedy someone posted online, but the actual pattern I use with patients who come to me stuck in this exact cycle. And I'm going to save the most important piece for the end, because it's the one thing almost nobody thinks to address, and once you hear it, you'll understand why water timing alone was never going to fully solve this for you. Before we get into the method itself, I want to walk you through why this happens in the first place. I know it's tempting to skip straight to the fix, but understanding the mechanism is what makes people actually stick with this instead of abandoning it after 3 days, because it feels like a random set of rules with no logic behind them. There are 3 things that change in your body after 50 that make nighttime urination more likely, and once you know all 3, the solution is going to make a lot more sense. The first is your bladder itself. It's a muscle. And like every other muscle, it can lose some elasticity as you age. That means it holds a bit less than it used to, and it starts sending signals sooner, sometimes before it's actually full. You feel urgency that isn't really matched by volume. Picture a balloon that's been stretched and used for years. It doesn't hold air quite the way it used to, and it doesn't take much to make it feel full. The second is your fluid rhythm. When you were younger, your body was good at holding fluid steady during the day and releasing more of it while you were awake and moving around. As you get older, that rhythm can shift, and more of that fluid gets released at night instead. This has a name, nocturnal polyuria, and it's one of the more fixable reasons people find themselves up at 2 a.m. It isn't a disease, it's a shift in timing, and timing is something you can work with. The third is simpler than it sounds. Your daytime habits catch up with you at night. The coffee you had at 8 a.m., the tea in the afternoon, the glass of wine with dinner, the salty meal at lunch. None of that disappears. Your kidneys are still processing all of it hours later, often right when you're trying to fall asleep. So what feels like a nighttime problem is very often a daytime habit playing out on a delay. So here's what that actually means in practice. It's not that your bladder is broken, and it's not that you're drinking too much water overall. The timing, the rhythm, and a few hidden habits are working against you instead of with you. Once you shift those, your body starts doing what it's supposed to do, which is rest overnight instead of processing fluid all night long. Think of it less as fixing something broken and more as correcting a schedule that's drifted out of sync with how your body actually operates at this stage of life. Now let's talk about the biggest mistakes I see, because if you're currently doing any of these, I want you to stop tonight, and I mean tonight, not next week. There are 3 mistakes that show up again and again in my patients, and almost all of them are doing at least one without realizing it. The first mistake is cutting your water off too hard in the evening. I know the logic. Less water in, less need to go. But when you drink too little overall, your urine becomes more concentrated, and concentrated urine is actually more irritating to your bladder lining, not less. That irritation can trigger the urge to go even when your bladder isn't full. So the harder you cut water at night, the more likely you are to feel like you need to go, which is the opposite of what you were trying to accomplish. I've had patients who were drinking almost nothing after 4 p.m. and still waking up 3 times a night, completely confused about why it wasn't working. This is usually why. The second mistake is skipping water for most of the day and then trying to catch up in the evening. This happens constantly with people who get busy, forget to drink, realize at 6 p.m. that they've barely had anything, and then have a large glass of water right before bed to compensate. That's almost guaranteed to wake you up a few hours later, because you've just handed your kidneys a large volume of fluid at exactly the moment they're supposed to be slowing down for the night. The third mistake is ignoring hidden fluid and hidden sodium. Soup, sauce, deli meat, restaurant food, even things like ice cream, all carry more sodium and more moisture than people assume. Sodium pulls water into your bloodstream, and your kidneys eventually have to process that extra fluid. If your saltiest meal of the day is dinner, guess when your body deals with it? Right in the middle of the night, while you're asleep and least able to handle it comfortably. So those are the 3 mistakes working against almost everyone I see: cutting water too hard, backloading your fluids instead of front-loading them, and ignoring where your sodium is actually landing in your day. None of these make you someone who's doing this wrong. They make you someone who was never told how your body actually works. That's a very different thing, and I want you to hold on to that distinction, because a lot of what follows is about working with your biology instead of fighting it. Now let's get into the actual method, because this is where things start to shift for people fairly quickly, often within the first week or 2. There are 4 pieces to this. I'm going to walk you through each one in order, and I'll tell you now. The 4th one is the piece almost nobody talks about, and it's often the real reason people keep waking up even after they've already tried everything else on this list. So stay with me through all 4 because they build on each other, and skipping to the end without understanding the first 3 will make the 4th one far less effective. The first piece is front-loading your hydration. Here's what I mean by that. Aim to drink the majority of your daily water, somewhere around 70 to 80% of it, between when you wake up and about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Your body has hours during that window to process fluid and move it through your system before bedtime arrives. If you're already well hydrated by mid-afternoon, your body isn't scrambling to catch up later, and it isn't holding on to extra fluid that gets released the moment you finally lie down and stop moving. A simple way to build this habit is to keep a glass or bottle somewhere visible, refill it with your morning coffee, again at lunch, and again in the middle of the afternoon. By the time dinner rolls around, you should feel caught up already, not thirsty and rushing to make up ground you lost earlier in the day. I had a patient, a retired engineer in his early 70s, who came to me convinced he had a prostate problem. And while there was some mild enlargement worth addressing separately, the real answer showed up when we tracked his actual drinking pattern for 2 full days using a simple fluid diary. He was consuming less than half a glass of water before noon most days, and then close to a full liter between 6 and 9 at night, almost entirely out of habit rather than thirst. We simply flipped the order. Water first thing in the morning, steady sips through the day, a firm stop by early evening. Within about 6 weeks, he went from waking up 3 or 4 times a night down to once, and most nights, not at all. So that's the first piece. Drink earlier in the day, not later. Let your kidneys do the heavy lifting while you're upright and awake, not while you're lying flat trying to sleep. It's a simple reordering of the same amount of water, not a reduction, and that distinction matters more than people expect. The second piece is what I'd call the taper, rather than the shutoff. Starting roughly 2 hours before bed, begin easing off your fluid intake. This doesn't mean cutting yourself off completely, and it definitely doesn't mean the aggressive restriction I warned you about earlier. A few small sips are fine, especially if you're thirsty or taking evening medication that needs water to go down. What you want to avoid in that window is a full glass, a cup of tea, or a bowl of soup right before you lie down for the night. Think of it less like flipping a switch and more like slowly closing a tap over a couple of hours. Your body responds much better to a gradual wind down than it does to an abrupt stop. And this small difference in approach is often what separates people who stick with this from people who give up after a few nights because they felt overly restricted and thirsty. A lot of patients ask me if 2 hours is a strict rule, and honestly, it's a guideline more than a law. Some people do better with 90 minutes. Some need closer to 3 hours depending on their bedtime and how sensitive their bladder is. The point isn't the exact number. The point is that the transition should be gradual, not sudden, and that you find the version of this that lets you fall asleep without feeling parched. The third piece is paying attention to what I'd call the hidden disruptors in your day, mainly caffeine and alcohol. Both of these are diuretics, meaning they pull more fluid out of your body than they put in, and that effect doesn't wear off quickly. It can last for several hours, sometimes longer than people assume. That afternoon cup of coffee or tea might still be influencing your kidneys well into the evening without you realizing it at all, because the diuretic effect is quiet and doesn't announce itself the way, say, an upset stomach would. And the glass of wine with dinner, as relaxing as it feels in the moment, is one of the most common and most overlooked causes of a 2 a.m. bathroom trip. Alcohol doesn't just add fluid volume, it actively suppresses a hormone that normally helps your body concentrate urine and hold on to fluid overnight. So even a modest glass can have an outsized effect on how many times you're up. My advice here isn't to eliminate either one entirely, and I want to be clear about that, because plenty of people enjoy their coffee or their evening drink and don't want to give it up completely. The advice is to shift the timing. Try having your last caffeinated drink no later than early afternoon. And if you enjoy an evening drink, consider moving it earlier or cutting back on a few nights a week just to see how your body responds. Most people notice a difference within just a handful of nights of experimenting with this. So that's 3 pieces so far. Front load your water earlier in the day. Taper gradually instead of cutting off suddenly, and watch where caffeine and alcohol are actually landing in your schedule, because both linger far longer than people expect, quietly working against you long after you finish the drink itself. Now here's the 4th piece, and this is the one I promised you at the start. This is the piece that changes the outcome for the majority of patients I see, more than the first 3 combined, and almost nobody brings it up, not even in most of the general advice floating around out there. It's sodium timing. Most people think about water, some people think about caffeine. Almost nobody thinks about when they're eating their saltiest meal of the day, and this is genuinely the piece that tends to surprise patients the most when I explain it. When you eat something high in sodium, your body needs extra water to balance that sodium out in your bloodstream, and it often pulls that water out of your system hours later once you're lying down and your circulation has changed. If your saltiest meal is dinner, that process is happening while you're asleep, which is exactly when you don't want your kidneys working overtime. Here's the practical fix. Try to make dinner your lightest meal of the day in terms of salt, and save saltier foods for lunch, when your body still has hours of daylight and activity to process everything before bedtime arrives. A lighter dinner, lower in sodium, is one of the most underrated tools I know of for reducing nighttime bathroom trips, and it costs nothing and requires no supplement or prescription of any kind. There's a second habit that pairs directly with this one, and it's just as overlooked by most people. In the hour or 2 before bed, if you tend to notice swelling in your ankles or legs, try sitting with your legs elevated for 15 or 20 minutes. And here's why that actually matters, because the reasoning behind it is what makes it worth doing consistently rather than skipping. Throughout the day, especially if you're sitting for long stretches, whether at a desk, in a chair watching television, or just resting, fluid can settle in the lower half of your body. It's often subtle enough that you don't even notice any visible swelling. But the moment you lie down flat to sleep, gravity no longer holds that fluid in your legs the way it did while you were upright. It shifts, moves back into circulation, travels to your kidneys, and ends up filtered directly into your bladder within an hour or 2 of lying down. That's often why people feel completely fine going to bed and then find themselves urgently needing the bathroom less than 2 hours later, even though they didn't drink anything close to bedtime. Elevating your legs before bed gives your circulatory system a chance to reabsorb that fluid while you're still upright and awake, so your bladder handles it before you ever lie down, instead of processing it at midnight while you're trying to stay asleep. It's a small, almost passive habit, but the effect on total nighttime urine output can be significant. I want to tell you about a patient of mine, a woman in her mid-70s who had been waking up 4 to 5 times every single night for close to 3 years. She'd tried 2 different medications prescribed by her previous doctor. She'd done pelvic floor therapy for several months. Nothing gave her lasting relief, and by the time she came to me, she was genuinely starting to believe this was simply what the rest of her life was going to look like. When she finally came in, we did a simple 24-hour urine collection along with a full dietary recall, and her sodium intake was well above what's typically recommended, and most of it was landing at dinner, often from things like canned soup and deli sandwiches she assumed were harmless. We shifted her saltiest meal to lunch, added a short leg elevation routine before bed, and layered in the front-loading and taper habits we'd already talked about, introducing them one at a time rather than all at once so she wouldn't feel overwhelmed. Within about 8 weeks, she was down to 1 or 2 trips a night instead of 4 or 5. And when she came back for her follow-up appointment, she actually got emotional telling me what it felt like to sleep through most of the night again, something she said she'd genuinely stopped believing was possible for her at this point in her life. That's the kind of shift that's realistically possible here, and I think it's worth sitting with for a second, because I know some of you listening have been dealing with this for years and have quietly started to assume it's just something you have to live with now that you're older. It generally isn't. It's usually a pattern that can be adjusted, not a permanent condition you're stuck with. And the fact that it took this long for someone to explain the actual mechanism to her says a lot about how rarely this gets discussed. If any part of what I just described sounds familiar, especially the part about a heavier dinner or afternoon swelling you've been ignoring, I'd like to know. Tell me which of the 4 pieces feels like it applies most directly to your situation, because it genuinely helps me figure out what to focus on in future videos, and I do read through what people share. So let's bring all 4 pieces together, because on their own, each one helps a little, but together they compound in a way that single habits alone can't fully match. The first piece, front-load your hydration earlier in the day so your kidneys can process fluid while you're upright and active, not while you're trying to sleep. The second piece, taper your fluids gradually in the 2 hours before bed instead of shutting off all at once, so your body isn't shocked into producing concentrated, irritating urine. The third piece, pay attention to when you're having caffeine and alcohol, since both linger far longer than most people assume and can still be affecting you well into the night, long after the cup or glass is empty. And the fourth piece, the one that ties everything together, shift your saltiest meal away from dinner and give your legs a chance to release built-up fluid before you lie down, so your body isn't quietly redistributing that fluid into your bladder the moment gravity stops holding it in your legs. None of these 4 pieces require medication. None of them require a special product or a supplement you have to go out and buy. They require attention to timing, which is genuinely different from the amount of effort most people assume something like this takes. Here's what a full day built around this actually looks like, so you can picture doing it yourself instead of just hearing the rules described in the abstract, which can feel disconnected from your actual routine. In the morning, before coffee, before checking your phone, have a full glass of water. This sets the tone for the rest of the day and corrects for the mild dehydration that happens overnight while you sleep and aren't taking in any fluid at all. Through the late morning and into early afternoon, keep sipping consistently water or herbal tea, whatever you actually enjoy drinking, aiming to have the bulk of your fluids finished by mid-afternoon rather than saving them for the evening hours. At lunch, if you're going to have a saltier meal, this is the time for it, not dinner, since your body still has daylight hours ahead of it to process and balance that sodium. In the late afternoon, have your last caffeinated drink if you're going to have one at all that day, giving it enough runway to clear your system before bedtime. At dinner, keep things lighter on sodium than you might normally. A little less sauce, a little less soup, maybe a squeeze of lemon or some fresh herbs instead of extra salt for flavor, so you're not sending your kidneys into overdrive right before sleep. About 2 hours before bed, start tapering your fluids. Small sips only, and only if you actually need them. And right before bed, if you deal with any swelling in your legs or ankles, spend 15 or 20 minutes with them elevated, then take your time fully emptying your bladder before you lie down. Rushing through that last step can leave you not fully empty, which shortens how long it takes before you feel the urge to go again. This isn't about doing everything perfectly from day one, and I don't want you to feel like you have to overhaul your entire routine overnight. Even getting 3 or 4 of these pieces right consistently tends to produce a noticeable difference within 1 to 2 weeks, which is honestly faster than most people expect from something this straightforward. I do want to be honest with you about something because I think it matters more than a tidy wrap-up would. For some people, nighttime urination isn't only about water habits. It can be tied to other things too. Certain medications, blood sugar patterns, prostate changes in men, or pelvic floor changes in women. If you try adjusting these habits consistently for a few weeks and you're still waking up multiple times a night, that's worth bringing up with your own doctor. Not because something is necessarily wrong, but because there may be another piece to your specific situation, and you deserve a real answer rather than more guesswork layered on top of what we've covered here today. I also want to say something directly to anyone who has started to feel like this is just what getting older looks like now, because I hear that sentiment more than you'd think. It generally isn't true. What's actually happening is a handful of very fixable patterns compounding on each other quietly, night after night, until they feel permanent and unchangeable. They're usually not. Your bladder isn't failing you. Your body has just been waiting for the right instructions, and now you have them laid out in front of you. Try this for 7 days. Not perfectly, just consistently. Front load your water, taper gently before bed, watch your caffeine and alcohol timing, and shift your saltiest meal away from dinner while giving your legs a chance to settle before you lie down. Come back after a week and think about how many times you were waking up before you started compared to where you land by the end of the week. I know exactly what it feels like to dread going to bed because you already know you'll be up again in a few hours. I've heard that from more patients than I can count, and I know how much it wears on you, not just physically, but mentally, the anticipation of another broken night settling in before it's even started. You deserve better rest than that, and it's genuinely closer than you might think. Often just a few adjusted habits away rather than a complicated medical fix. If this was helpful, do me a favor and hit like on this video. It helps this information reach other people who are dealing with exactly what you've been dealing with, often quietly and without knowing there's an actual explanation behind it. Subscribe so you don't miss what I'm covering next, because there's a second, closely related habit I haven't even touched on today that affects a lot of the same patients I see. And if you know someone who's been struggling with this, a parent, a spouse, a friend who mentions being tired all the time or dreading their own nights, send this to them. It might be the simplest thing you do for them all year. Leave a comment and let me know which of these 4 pieces you're going to start with tonight. I read through them, and sometimes the questions people leave become the exact topic of the next video I make. Your body isn't broken. It's just been waiting for the right information, and now you have it. Here's to your first full night of real, uninterrupted sleep in a long time. I'll see you in the next one.